What's up, everyone? It's Rob, and this week I want to talk about musical intervals. So, why are intervals helpful? Intervals are very useful in identifying or knowing what to expect before you even write anything. So, you can look at an interval and you can kind of already tell what type of sound it's going to be, whether that's going to be consonant or dissonant. And obviously, that is super helpful when you're trying to create melodies because when you think of something, you're just like, okay, well, do I want to take it more in a dissonant approach, or like if I'm starting from this point and moving to this point, like how do I want to get there? And knowing the intervals and kind of like what they do can really improve like your ability to create melodies faster and honestly create some more interesting melodies. So before we actually jump into intervals specifically, I kind of want to talk about the different types of intervals. And the first type is melodic intervals or melody. So melodic intervals are essentially just intervals that are played sequentially, and that's what melodies are. They're just notes that are played one after another. So there's nothing going on um, alongside of it. It's just one note and then the next one, and then the next one, and so on. So normally when you are like humming to a song, you're kind of thinking of a general melody of the song. Melodies are essentially the backbone of music, and harmony is the support of the melody. So a harmonic interval or harmony is when notes are played at the same time. So the whole point of harmony is to support the melody, and it's kind of to bring out certain aspects of the melody, or to kind of have multiple um, you can have multiple melodies playing together and to kind of create different sort of feelings and stuff like that. A non-music example, I guess, to kind of describe harmony and melody would be like if you took a 5-layer cake apart, and each part on its own could be a melody, but as soon as you start stacking the slices on top of each other, you kind of have a harmonic cake per se. But enough about cake. Let's start diving into what intervals are. So, what is an interval? Essentially, at a fundamental level, an interval is just the distance between two notes. So, this distance also has certain qualities that I'll explain in just a little bit. But for now, let's just take it from the very beginning. We have 12 different notes that we could ever play in the chromatic scale. So, like, there's never going to be more than 12. So, what this means is that there's a total of 12 half steps from each from a note, like anywhere you go between different tones. So from the first C all the way to the next C and the next octave, that is 12 half steps, right? So within these 12 steps, though, we kind of have 7 main intervals, and that would be stuff like the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh. But we can split some of these intervals up into what I call smaller flavors of the intervals, and you'll see that in just a second. So first, let's take a look at the list that I have of the different interval distancing and kind of how we notate them and kind of what they're called. Okay, so here are all of the different intervals that we could possibly have from any kind of given tone. So we're always going to assume that we're going to be starting with C as the first note here. But so this is essentially if you were to go from C to F, you'd have a fourth. If you were to go from C to G, that'd be a fifth, and so on and so forth. But let's kind of look at what I have laid out here. So first I have the actual interval name, and then I have whether or not it's perfect or consonants or dissonance or imperfect. I'll get into this stuff a little later, especially when I kind of talk about the tritone. But for now, just take a look at this and see that these are the main intervals that we have. We have a unison, a second, a third, a fourth, a tritone, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and then the octave. And the octave is literally just 12 half steps above our unison, and it's the same note, or it's the same tone, just a higher frequency. And that's about it. So this is like the basics of it. The next thing to kind of talk about is this minor. You'll notice that the second, the third, the 6th, and the 7th all have a minor second, a major second, and a minor and major kind of quality behind them as well. And that is specifically this isn't major or minor in the normal sense of like if you play C to C sharp, it's going to sound sad or happy. It's more of just a qualifier of saying, hey, you have two kinds of seconds, and the C sharp, it just happens to be a half step lower than D, so it's minor, and then the major second is always a half step higher than the minor second. So if that doesn't make sense, just know that if you go from C to C sharp, it's a minor second, and if you go from C to D, it's considered a major second. But at the end of the day, it is still a second. It's under the second umbrella. And it's the same thing with the 3rd, the 6th, and the 7th. All of these notes, so 8 half steps would be a minor 6th, 9 half steps would be a major 6th, but again, overall, it is still just a 6th. So you would say going from C to G sharp would still be a 6th, it would just be a minor 6th. And that's essentially all there is to the minor and major aspect of this. The next thing to kind of talk about now, I guess, would be perfect intervals, and this kind of goes alongside consonants. But essentially, what a perfect interval means is it means that if you play a C note, and then if you were to play another C note, it would sound like everything's resolved, like there's no tension behind it. And if you were to go from C to a F, it would sound, it's also perfect. So there's no tension or nothing sounds like it needs to be released, right? The perfect way I guess, to kind of show this is actually going here. So we know that a second is dissonant, right? So if I play this, so C sharp that was a minor second interval. Notice how that interval sounds, it's building tension, like it feels like something isn't quite resolved. Well, if we go to a perfect interval from C sharp, which would be E, so that would be, this would be a minor third, which again, a minor third is still considered imperfect. Well, actually, let's not do that. Let's do 5 half steps. So that would be F sharp. So if we go to the perfect fifth of C sharp from after playing that, it'll sound resolved. So if I do this, so now it kind of takes away that tension, right? And that's essentially what intervals allow you to do. So going from C to C sharp, you know it's going to build tension. But if you go from C sharp to F, it sounds fine. It sounds like it doesn't need to resolve anymore because it's already done that with the perfect fifth there from C sharp to F sharp. That kind of originally when I was thinking about going to this E here from D, imperfect intervals are still consonant, so they still sound resolved, but it just isn't as strong. So it doesn't sound nearly as 100% clean. So a lot of the times, it's still a good note to land on if you want to like finish something or if you don't want to build dissonance, but it's just not as strong as a perfect interval. Dissonance, obviously, is the complete opposite of consonants or perfect intervals. And what you're doing is you are building tension. So again, if I play the C to C sharp, your ear doesn't want this to be the last note. So That's essentially what consonance and dissonance means. So you might have been thinking when I was playing on the piano there, that doesn't sound very resolved, or it sounds really weird when you play it like that. The reason why is because my starting note was on C, and I was assuming that we were in C major, but then when I play C sharp and F sharp, these two notes are out of key. So technically, while C sharp is, well, going from C sharp to F sharp does resolve properly if they're on their own, so like this. So that sounds fine, like that sounds okay. But if I were to start on C and then go to C sharp and then F sharp, it sounds really weird because I'm starting on C. So I guess I'll do a better example here of where we're actually just staying in key of C major. And so C major would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So if I were to go from C to D, which is a second, that would sound dissonant. And then from D, I want to play, let's say I play a perfect fifth. So go up to A. This should sound, so C to D should sound dissonant, and then D to A should sound perfectly fine. Like if once we land on A, everything should sound hunky-dory and should sound resolved. So I guess let's try it. So yeah, that sounds a lot better than what I was originally doing from going from like this. Because C sharp and F sharp are out of key, so that's gonna clash a little bit. But if we actually stay in key here and play the different intervals between these, then yeah, it makes a lot more sense that way. So I guess just kind of use that as an example. So I just want to kind of quickly talk about that before I jumped into tritones and everything, because I thought about it for a second, like, wait a second, that doesn't really make much sense for me to go from C to C sharp, from C sharp to F sharp, when I just said that we're going to be playing in C. So it did sound a little weird when I did that, and I just kind of wanted to re-clarify what was going on with that. Something that's pretty cool, but might be a little complicated to talk about, and if you don't understand any of this when I say it, that's perfectly fine. But you might notice, if you're really like aware, all the notes in a major scale are all either major or perfect. And what I mean by that is if you go to C to D, notice it's major. D to E, major, perfect, perfect, major, major, and then you have the octave. So this is kind of how scales really get their like definition. So when a scale has a whole bunch of minor intervals, obviously it's going to sound more minor overall. And that's kind of what happens with the minor scale. So the minor scale would be using the minor seventh, the minor sixth, and the minor third. And obviously, because there's a bunch of minor intervals in it, it's going to make everything sound, sad. And that's just kind of one thing I wanted to quickly mention. And if none of that really makes any sense, or if that doesn't help you like connect any dots or anything, that's perfectly okay. It's a little bit more than just the intervals themselves. That's getting more into like the scale patterns and kind of like why like scales and certain things like that sound the way that they do, because really at the end of the day, the intervals kind of define all of that. But I just wanted to quickly bring that up and kind of just explain that, like that this is where the major and minor variations really come into play, and kind of how they help define what scales sound like and what they are. So now let's finally jump into well, one more thing. I wanted to quickly kind of cover what I meant by this is consonants with a caveat. So the fourth, if played melodically, is considered consonant. If it's played harmonically, meaning with notes at the same time as other notes are being played, it's considered dissonant. So the fourth is actually kind of this sneaky little guy that kind of can be either perfectly consonant or it can be dissonant. And that's kind of something that you just have to be a little careful of when you're using fourths. They're a little sneaky, but yeah, yeah, other than that, let's jump right into the tritone. All right, let's talk about the devil's interval now, also known as the tritone. A tritone is literally the most dissonant interval you could ever use. It's incredibly jarring to use. Tritones are exactly smack dab in the middle of two octaves, or between an octave. So what that means is it's six half steps up from C, and it's also six half steps down from the next C. And the reason why it gets this nickname, the Devil's Tritone or the Devil's Interval, is because it kind of comes from the Middle Ages, where musically it just wasn't used much, just because it just doesn't sound that good. Like it unless if it's used properly, it sticks out like a sore thumb, and it just really doesn't mesh with much of anything. And there was a lot of rumors that it was like bans in the Catholic Church, or that composers were killed if they played it and stuff like that. I couldn't find any evidence to support that. More than likely, composers were just kind of pushed not to use it just because it sounds so strange. And we can actually listen to it right here just by testing it out. So it's very unsettling. It's not a very, happy sound type of thing. And this is kind of why your diminished chords sound so weird, is because they actually have a tritone in it. So C diminished is just a minor interval. So we go from C to D, we go up three steps. So D sharp, so C, D sharp, and then F sharp would be the next three steps. And because it's diminished, it gives that weird, unsettling vibe. So that's why diminished chords sound really strange. And if you were to do a completely diminished chord by adding another minor third on top of this, which would be A, so if you were to do C, D sharp, F sharp, and then A, that is a full diminished chord, and that chord is very like unstable, and it just doesn't sound very good on its own. Now, there are use cases for the tritone and diminished chords in general. Most of the time, they're used to push into something else, because these really want to resolve. So if you ever use a tritone, this is definitely saying it's kind of like pushing someone's ear to be uh, go somewhere else. Like, you never would really ever want to just like land on a tritone, unless if that's kind of like what you're going for. But that's kind of my overall spiel about it, and that's kind of where it gets its name, why it's called that. And it's not really used very much in like older music, because a lot of the times it just, again, it sticks out like a sore thumb. It sounds not super great, but it's kind of to me, it's kind of a cool sound, and there are ways of using it. um, but yeah, it's pretty rough to listen to. But that's about it. So let's go ahead and wrap up. Okay, so we've gone over essentially all the different intervals that you could ever have, and this can really help you when you're writing a melody or writing harmonies or anything like that, or if you're looking at music and you're trying to understand why certain things sound the way that they do. If you just break it down and you look at the actual intervals between the notes, that'll kind of tell you what's happening. And yeah, it's a really good way to kind of already have this idea in your head of, okay, if I play this note and then if I go to this next note, I already kind of know what it's going to do, and what kind of feeling it's going to have, and kind of what it's going to produce. So there's a couple things that I left out that I didn't really cover, and that was kind of inverting the the intervals, and also kind of talking about augmented and diminished type of things. That is more specifically for just like the sheet music itself, and kind of like notating certain things. Um, and it's kind of more, it's a little more advanced, so I kind of left it out. I can talk about it if it ever comes down to it, or maybe I'll do another video on it that's kind of diving more into specifically more about augmented intervals and diminished intervals, and then also kind of how you would be inverting them. And but that again, that comes down to more just like actually reading the sheet music, and when you would actually write sheet music, you would use those terms, or like you would denominate certain intervals certain ways. But just from an understanding perspective, everything that we went over today is basically anything from a basic level, what anything that you'd ever need in order to like write melodies or harmonies or anything like that. So I hope you learned something, and if you did, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week.